Hello, it's Jim Hutchins for the Jerusalem Connection Truth Report for this week. Our parashat for this week is entitled Behar, on the mountain, or on Mount Sinai it actually refers to. It's taken, the Torah portion is Leviticus chapter 25 verse 1 through 26:2. And it deals with the Sabbath year, what the conduct of the Jews should be during the Sabbath year, and it specifically spells out the importance of the year of Jubilee. But there's tucked away in this Torah portion this week a very critical, very, very significant passage. And it has to do with whose land is it that God is talking about, that scriptures are talking about, that the Palestinians are talking about, that the Israelis are talking about. Whose land is it? And it's disputed to this day, highly disputed. The Palestinians claim that there is because of their longevity there, it's their land, and the Israelis are occupying it. The Israelis claim God's covenant promise. The land is theirs because of this decree by his covenant. Whose land is it? Well, God says this very clearly in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 23. He says, the land, and he's talking about the land from the Tigris, or from the Euphrates, from the Nile. He's given those boundaries before. The land must not be sold permanently. And why? Here's the reason. Because the land is mine. That's what God says. Whose land is it? The land is mine, says God. And you are but aliens and my tenants. I have determined that this is my land, and I have likewise determined who's going to oversee it and who's going to be a tenant. And I've said the sons of Isaac, the descendants of Abraham through Isaac, they're to be the tenants in this land. Now, as we know from throughout Scripture, there's been at least a 2,000-year gap since AD 70. But in 1948, the Jews were proclaimed, actually they proclaimed their sovereignty over the land that God had promised. And it's been in dispute ever since. It was in dispute before that, as a matter of fact. But God has been very clear as to who this land belongs to, and it belongs to him. Now, because of the Jews' disobedience, he kicked out his tenants. Because of their blasphemous disobedience, Ezekiel says they have profaned his name among the nations. And yet, in spite of that, he has brought them back in this state of unbelief, in this state of profanation, if you will. And I love what Jeremiah says, and this is an extension of the Haftorah reading for this week in Jeremiah chapter 32. Because God says this, verse 37, I will surely, he's committing himself again, I will surely gather them, that is the Jews, from all the lands where I banished them, where I banished them in my furious anger and my great wrath. I'm going to bring them back in this condition. I will bring them back to this place and let them live in safety. They will be my people, and I will be their God. I will give them a singleness of heart and action, so that they will always fear me, and for their own good and the good of their children after. He's talking about a spiritual renewal, a spiritual enlightenment. He's talking about a conversion, if you will, that they have never had, not as a people. But it will be a believing remnant. And I believe it has reference to their acknowledging that believing remnant, that faithful remnant who acknowledges their Messiah. And we believe that to be Jesus. That's coming. And notice what God says in closing, verse 40. I will make, God says, I will make, and I love this passage, I will make an everlasting covenant with them, never to end, eternally. I will never stop doing good to them. I will inspire them to fear me so that they'll never turn away from me. I will rejoice in doing them good. And now listen to this. And I will most assuredly plant them in this land, God says, in my land. I will most assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart and soul. The process has begun. It is a work in process. But you can be sure that God has set his heart and soul, his passion, his integrity on planting them in his land, for eternity. Praise the Lord. And that's the truth.